And who do I have among me that came all this way? Ben and Luke. I'm so honored to have the two of them here to hear my brief history of my story after 88 years of living. Pretty good life, I'd say, for a guy that started from nowhere. So anyway, with that, I was born in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, right outside Pittsburgh, 1934. And to the best of my recollection, lived with my grandmother and grandfather, and my mother, of course. My mom and dad must have been separated. This was the first 7 years of my life. I only remember living with my dad for a very brief period of time during that. During the course of living at my grandmother's, I was born in her bed, by the way, not in a hospital, and I slept in a double bed with my mother's brother, my uncle, and my half-brother Jim, who was 10 years older than me. So I sort of got the squeeze in the middle of the bed. So anyway, I lived there until 1947, after the war had broke out, and my dad went to work then and took a job in Akron, Ohio for Goodyear Aircraft, building aircraft for the Navy. And we were there from 1947 until, or 1941 rather, 1941 to 47. In 47 moved to Camp Hill, Pennsylvania temporarily. But before that, in Akron, my first job, I started at 10 years old working at a grocery store. And I remember clearly coming home from school in the afternoon on Fridays and working until almost midnight, prepping the store for the big day on Saturday. I was too young, I couldn't even ride a bike with a grocery basket on the front. It was too small. So anyway, that was a great, great fun job. During the course of living in Akron, I had pneumonia and appendicitis. One of those ending in prolonged period missing school and as a result being held back a year. So we moved to Camp Hill in 47 and lived in a boarding house, believe it or not. My mom and dad and I was sharing a bedroom. The lady that had the boarding house did all the cooking, so that's where we got our meals. And during the course of living there, my dad ended up buying a house at auction. The auctioneer standing on the front steps. He bought it for $4,000 in Sharmanstown. So we lived there during the course of my growing up in high school, which was probably one of the two greatest experiences of my life. I just had a great, great time in high school. I had, because I was a year older than everybody else, I was able to buy a car before anyone else had one. In fact, I had two, a 32 Studebaker President and a 41 Ford Club Coupe at the same time. And I played sports. I played football, junior varsity, basketball, junior varsity baseball, which I didn't really care for that much, but had the most wonderful, wonderful friends, two of whom were like brothers to me. One, Addie, ending up co-founding a law school at the University of Hawaii, and couldn't have been a better time. Following my graduation, I joined the Navy, and during the course of that, I was on a destroyer escort, a destroyer, 3 submarines, two of them briefly, and the third one, USS Redfin, I was on for, I think, about 2 years. Couple of the highlights of my life while I was on on the redfin was pulling into Renfrewshire, Scotland on a weekend when we were doing anti-submarine warfare exercise off the coast of Norway. And in Renfrewshire, finding out that that is where the Whiteford ancestry began. And that was really, really interesting. The town's absolutely loaded with Whitefords. And the second one was sort of a thrill, sitting in Norfolk on a weekend with 14 of us aboard out of a complement of 130, told to get underway to go to sea because there was a hurricane coming up the coast. Why they sent us to sea, I have no idea. They sent all the surface craft in the Chesapeake Bay. But once we got on site, radar wasn't too good in those days, and it turned out the hurricane came right over us as we were on the surface. So needless to say, that was a better ride than anything you're going to find at Disneyland. Before going into submarine service, I was on the USS Soley, and I had met Grandma after going home multi-times. I was home on leave, and my friend Dick Quigley talked me into going to YMCA to a dance one night, and that's where we met. Subsequent to meeting her, I made 37 trips home, hitchhiking over 300 miles per weekend over a course of 11 months before we got married in 1956. I was stationed in Norfolk at the time, and then got transferred to Charleston, South Carolina, because we went into dry dock, and Grandma moved with me. We left Norfolk with a U-Haul trailer on the back with our very few belongings that we had, having no way, totally unknown where we were going to be living. And I remember clearly stopping at a Piggly Wiggly, getting a newspaper and going to the rental ads and finding one literally two blocks away from the store in a big city like Charleston, which is pretty ironic. So we went over and knocked on the door and went in, and the guy had just built a new garage with an apartment upstairs and was not going to, made it clear he was not going to rent it to a sailor. But he said, well, looking at Cena, there's no way that he could turn her away, so he rented it to us for 5 months. After we were finished there, Grandma moved back to Harrisburg, moved to Woodbine Street, which is not the greatest address in downtown Harrisburg by any means. And I was near the end of my tour and ended up at the Philadelphia Naval Yard temporarily on a USS Sailfish, another sub they transferred me to. And Aunt Carla was born then. I was at the base playing basketball and got a call that she was in delivery. And so Carla was born that night, December 17th. I got out of the Navy and decided I was going to be going to Penn State, but first joined Quaker Oats temporarily to get a job for some income, and worked there starting on a takeoff table for animal feed. And we had a feed mill there, and from the feed mill they sent the 100-pound and 50-pound sacks across on a conveyor belt, and my job was at the end of the conveyor belt to palletize the 150-pound bags. a little bit hard on the back. May have had something to do with the problem I've got today. So anyway, I quit Quaker Oats and then I went to Penn State for a 2-year program on electronics engineering. And at the time I was going to school, the first year I was really struggling with math. And one of the reasons I was struggling is we had a full four-striper captain who had just gotten out of the Navy, was teaching the course, and he didn't know what he was doing. So anyway, I passed everything else okay, and in that math course I ended up with a 59 out of required 60 for passage, and that one point literally changed my life. Because what ended up happening, it was prerequisite to, I think, 3 courses the following year, which I could not take because I had to take that math course over again. So I started back to work back to school the second year. I was working 3 jobs at the time, hauling cement block on a flatbed truck. You had to unload them by hand. I was working as a checker in a supermarket. And then thirdly, while I was at school one day, I got a call, Grandma got a call from Joe DeFilippi, who was the manager of the shipping department at Quaker, and asked if I would like a part-time job in the evening. So I took a calculated risk, took on a 3rd job, and I went to work there. I guess I did a good enough job that he ended up offering me the job full-time. And the second big decision of my life, the job was offered to me. And I said I'm going to take a calculated risk and drop out of school and depend on my own intelligence to get ahead. So that's what I did. So I quit school, quit the other jobs, worked full-time at Quaker, ended up in the shipping department, and shortly thereafter got another promotion to production planning. And I worked at the plant for 5 years. After working there, I was offered a job in packaged material purchasing in Chicago. And during the course of talking about that, the production planning department found out about the offer. And Dick Glantz, who I dearly loved, so I ended up working for him later. He came to Chicago, and he came to Sharmanstown and offered me a job in production planning in Chicago. And then Ham Varner in commodity purchasing heard about the other 2 offers I had, and he came to Sharmanstown and offered me a job. So I had 3 job offers at the same time. Again, I had to make a calculated decision which one I was going to take. And I ended up choosing, rightly so, choosing commodity purchasing. So I got transferred to Chicago, and before being transferred, about a year or so before that, we were able to buy a house in Mechanicsburg, a 3-bedroom, brand new home, $10,500 I paid for it. And we got transferred to Chicago. The cheapest thing I could find was a home on Pick Street in downtown, or on Wheaton, for $17,500. So I ended up with a 70% increase in our home expense, and I got a $100 increase for going from Charlottetown to Chicago, from $6,000 a year to $7,200, and that was negotiated by Jim Kimmel, our plant manager, to get me even that much. So literally, we were almost starving at that point. We did absolutely nothing for entertainment. Only went out even a couple times for ice cream. And so anyway, after that, things started one after another, promotions and getting better all the time. And finally, after 5 years in that house, able to build a house on Marion Court. My career at Quaker could not have been any better. I can't even begin to describe some of the things that were highlights of it, but a couple things that I had opportunities for was to go from loading, palletizing 100-pound sacks of feed to speaking to, as the after-dinner speaker at a board of directors meeting to a Fortune 500 company. Was to me quite an accomplishment. And Bob Stewart, who was the chairman at that time, is the one that asked me to do it. And so he and I got along pretty well, obviously, for me to have an opportunity like that. Another highlight was to have the Prime Minister of New Zealand visit me on a trip that he made to the States one time, and ended up taking him over to Bob Stewart's office and having a meeting there. So quite an adventure at Quaker until I got an outside boss who ran Quaker, who ran purchasing, and ends up he didn't like me very well because it was very obvious that he was somewhat jealous of my position in the company and the reputation I had there. So I worked for him for 11 months and ended up in November of 1987 resigning from the company. So I was out of work for close to a year until Pete Rhodes, who I had worked for at Quaker, at that time was president of Griffith Laboratories, called me one evening and said, "Are you ready to get off your ass and go back to work?" I remember his words. So we had dinner the following night at the DuPage Club in Oak Brook. And I said, "I'll take the job." He said, "I don't know what I can pay." I said, "Don't worry about it. We'll work that out." So anyway, I worked there 8 years. Was one of the executive committee. I was vice president of purchasing for Griffith North America. And I was pretty good at cost reduction. I did it at Quaker and very successfully. And so when I got to Griffith, I decided that I was going to try my hand there, and through the cooperation of Pete, we put together a corporate cost reduction program, and all departments were involved in it. And literally, we doubled the income of the company in 2 years. So needless to say, things went very, very well for me. I absolutely loved working at that company. During the course of working there, I bought a summer home on Lake Delvin, and the one that was available was the family had died, and it was in in a trust, and the trust was managed by Northern Trust, and they were obviously very anxious to sell it. I gave them a low-ball price on it, $265,000 for a 5-bedroom cedar frame home built in 1910 on a very high bank overlooking the lake. It was absolutely a stunning spot. And had that for a number of years, and ended up, when it became too much of a burden for us to take care of, selling it for $700,000. So I took that money, began to look around in Florida, and started on the East Coast, and came across old US 41, and crossing the bridge into Naples. I remember distinctly saying, "Oh my God, look at this place." So we ended up buying a place, a condominium in Naples, and we've been here now 22 years. So in the interim, Grandma got sick, and that was 2003, around 2003, when she got her ovarian cancer, and she battled that for about 16 months between Chicago and Naples, and finally died in April of 2005. And so subsequent to that, of course, after her death, I went to a bereavement group, and sitting there one night, Barb walked in, and it was her first time, and I tried to be very social with everybody that was there, and so when I saw her come in, I got up and walked over and introduced myself, and I could tell that she was alone and wasn't sure what she was doing, and I said, "I'll sit with you tonight." So I sat with her, and I got her water and sort of took care of her, and to this day she jokes about it. She said at the end of the meeting, you just got up and walked out, you didn't even say goodbye. And so it's a little laugh we have between each other to this day. So anyways, during the course of it, we got to know each other better, and ended up secretly, after the meeting, going out to Culver's and having some ice cream or something, and ended up going together and getting married about a year and a half later. So Barb and I have been married now for going on 17 years, and I can just tell you what a happy part of my life this has been. So in the later years, overall, I've been in extremely good health. My whole life I've worked out and gone to gyms and doing a lot of walking, and in the 7 years prior to 2020, in 7 years I'd walked over 13 million steps, or over 5,000 miles. So I was you could say I was in pretty good shape. So in August of 2019, I had a problem with one of my arteries in my neck, so I had carotid artery surgery in August. Subsequent to that, coming out of church on a Sunday morning, I end up giving my seat to a little black lady that was crippled, and I was sitting in the handicapped or senior section of the bus, and it wasn't 30 seconds after I gave it to her, the bus driver slammed on the brakes, and I flew and cracked my head open and a lot of other things, so I got pretty beat up. I got through that okay, and then in December we came to Florida, and I no sooner got here, in fact the hour I got here, I got anemia, ended up being ambulanced to the hospital, was there overnight, and recovered from that after several months. The following summer I had spinal surgery, and that went okay. Didn't cure my problem because I had two major problems in my back. So come December, came back to Naples, and I got anemia all over again. And it seems like the combination of the anemia and what I had discovered during the summer, I think of 2021, is that I have asbestosis from my submarine days, not knowing that the old World War II submarines were loaded with asbestos. So I'm living with asbestos, and now that's developed into pretty bad anemia for both all three things: my back, my hands, and my feet. So, sort of struggling with that today, but other than that, I'm great. So, any questions?
How many kids and grandkids and great-grandkids
Oh,
do
I
you have?
have 4 kids, all pretty healthy, with the exception right now Matthew is going through a bout of leukemia that he just found out about a month ago. And I have 10 grandchildren, 2 of which are going to have children in August and September. And when those 2 are born, I will have 10 great-grandchildren. I have 12 grandchildren, 10 great-grandchildren, or 22 altogether.
What made you decide to join the Navy?
When?
How did you decide?
I had no plan ahead of me in my life, because I'm not a student. I never was a student, and I sometimes seriously think I have a learning disability. And even the way I had to study when I went to college, I did end up between going to Penn State and then when I transferred to Chicago, going to DePaul overnight school. I finished the equivalent of 3 years of college, and then my job got too big after I had my triple fusion in '69 to go back to school. So I literally had to quit because of my job. But I went into the Navy just because I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And then once I got in the Navy, and once I got married, I got my head together and said, now I know what I'm to do, so I'm going to do it. And that's what I did. So.
And you mentioned those fond memories in Renfrewshire and
Scotland?
In some adventure. Do you have any other kind of fond memories of your time in the Navy, whether it be abroad or domestically?
Just that I really enjoyed being in the Navy, and I thoroughly enjoyed submarine service. It was a lot of fun, and nothing in particular I'd say other than the couple things I mentioned. One other thing I mentioned, speaking of the board of directors, one other highlight was after I became an officer, I was asked to be the guest speaker back at Sharmanstown at the Old Timers dinner. So to go from loading, putting sacks on a pallet, to being a guest speaker as an officer of the Quakers Company, to me was a
Wow.
pretty big highlight of my time there. Thoroughly enjoyable.
When you think of
Been pretty blessed overall. So I have absolutely no complaints in my life. And I have such a wonderful life now. Barb and I are just, my God, we're so compatible. It's scary.
when you think of that time in Marion Court, what memories or
Oh, my biggest memory of Marion Court was we were relatively new. I think there's probably 14 homes on the street. I think it was a new street being developed. And we were all good, very good friends, the entire street. And what we did, I was one of the first homes on the street, probably one of the first 5. Every time a new neighbor would move in, unbeknownst to them, the day they moved in, we had a party at their house. The whole street showed up. Everybody on the street. And I remember one guy, I can't remember his name, and we had a party at his house. And he got so drunk he walked right through the screen door on the sliding glass door and fell on the patio. And we had pig roast every year, and that was an all-night, a whole weekend thing. And so out in the middle of our park, in the middle of the cul-de-sac, we got a 110 or 120 pound pig and roast that thing overnight. And we had lobster broils. We'd fly-in lobsters from New England, and great place to live. We had a great time there.
and how many
Then
years? How many years total were you in?
I'm sorry?
How many years total were you in at Marion Court?
I would say, I'm guessing, 72. I'd say it was 72 I bought the place, I think. And I would have moved after I joined Griffith. I'd say 89. Probably 89. 72 to 89. So quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a great house. I really enjoyed living there.
And how about Lake Delavan? What stands out as memories from that time? And
Just had a lot of fun. I had the grandchildren there a lot of times, and kids were there, and the grandchildren were there, and it was a very festive place to be.
yeah,
We belonged to the yacht club, and so we went there quite a bit. And it was a beautiful home. We had a 18-foot Sea Ray small boat. Wasn't that big, but it was a lot of fun. And kids loved to tube off the back of that, and I was pretty good at giving them a pretty rough ride without flipping them off too. So had a lot of good times there. But the house just got to be too much because the whole back was loaded with giant oak trees, and in the fall they came down and nobody was around but me and Grandma, and so I had to do all the leaves every weekend, and it was just got to be too much. Wasn't fun at doing that. So we ended up heading south to see what we could find here, and literally ending up buying this condominium at 210 2nd Street South, the first condo we walked into to look at. And both of us agreed when we saw it that it was just absolutely ideal. And subsequently, I've had so many people say to me what an absolute ideal spot it is and how perfect it is. And I agree. I think it's been a great place to live. And another great thing is Naples has the highest longevity in the nation. And a lot of old people here. So that's why there's so many old people, because they live so long here. So for my health, the way I feel, other than my lungs, and my back and hands and feet, I think I'm in great shape, including my mind. I think I still got a fairly good mind. I wouldn't complain about it. So that's it. Anything else, guys?
If you had a piece of wisdom for the younger generations, what wisdom would you share? Or
The first thing that comes to my mind is to be godly and live by I guess the Ten Commandments is the best way to say it. And when you look at our nation today, we're going in the opposite direction, and you can see it going downhill. And somebody my age, I see it 10 times better than anyone in their 30s or 40s. I can see so clearly what is happening to this nation and how sad it is, how sad to watch it happen. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, and treat everybody equal. Doesn't matter if you're president of a company or if somebody washing dishes in a restaurant. Everybody has their own skills and should be proud of what they're doing at all levels, all levels. So living godly, treating people with respect, keeping balanced, keeping positive. Don't look at the negative side of things, look at the positive, because there's usually positive in almost everything. So that's the way I try to conduct my life, and I think so far it's worked pretty good for me.
there you go. Very good. Thank you, Grandpa.
Thanks, Grandpa.
Okay.